All right, welcome to the In-Secure-Ity Podcast. I'm Drew Thompson, and today we're making a bold statement. All of us are going to completely agree with this. Testing in production isn't just risky, it's essential. Yep, you heard that right. Stick around as we unpack in this controversial take. All right, well, welcome back. Like I said before the little intro video, today we're going to dive into testing in prod environments. I know we've all got an opinion, and we're all eager to share it. Maybe that's in line with our statement before, maybe not. But we've got a little bit of a segment that we like to do before we get into the topic of the day, and that's just a quick check-in, see how everybody's doing, what they've been up to. Aaron, you weren't on the last one, so you get to go first. What's up? What's going on in your life?
Uh, you know, Staying busy with different things. Kind of enjoyed. We did Saturday for Father's Day for since I work on Sunday, so to the art museum. Kind of just had a nice, relaxing Saturday. So
Cool. The chill weekends are the best weekends, where there's like nothing to do. You just kind of laze around for a bit. I will go next, and then I'm gonna keep going clockwise. And Tim, you're below me on my screen, so you'll be after I am. So our 20th wedding anniversary was Sunday.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Newlyweds. So cute.
Newlyweds. Been married longer than we've haven't been married. So more of my life I've spent married than not. Anyway, yeah, so 20th anniversary. No big celebration or anything right now or over the weekend because we're taking a pretty good trip to Europe and to Italy for a few weeks, and that'll be our anniversary celebration. But yeah, we did have some sad. We did get some cheeseburgers from Burger Bar for our anniversary dinner. Because we'll have plenty of Italian here in a few weeks, so it's all good. But yeah, that was our big thing. And then of course Father's Day was on Sunday. Most of it was spent, getting ready for a trip and such. So Tim, what do you got going on?
Well, we family and I went down to Destin, Florida, to the beach this weekend. Stayed at that Embassy Suites that I believe we stayed at on a work trip. Yep. So we got the private entrance to the beach right there. That was a good time. Nice, relaxing weekend.
Did you go to the restaurant with all the money on the walls? Wherever
We did
what
not.
was we ate? Okay.
We did not. No. We hung around the area, but yeah. So there's that. My move is still on for July 10th. So we're busy packing. Lee's going to be moving back into the house this weekend, ahead of the move. My other house guests are no longer in the house. And the other little bit of news that I just got is that the movie that I invested in, my dead friend Zoe through Legion M, has just announced that our domestic North American distribution rights have been picked up by Briarcliff Entertainment.
That's
So hopefully
awesome,
that means
man.
we'll have a release date soon, so that the rest of you can see this amazing movie.
It'll be available in local theaters.
Hopefully, I haven't seen the details of the distribution agreement, but as soon as I know, I'll let you know.
So you're a rich film backer now, soon to be.
Yeah, for the lowercase r.
Lowercase r. Fair enough. Well,
With
that's
an H
awesome,
at the
man.
end too.
Yeah, that's really cool though. And hey, old bald and grumpy, good to see you, man. That was the other streamer that I was talking about. He jumped in.
Ah,
I was before the episode kicked off, I was telling them that I saw your GIF, um, and I was trying to implement it on mine, and I couldn't get it done before the stream kicked off. But it was pretty cool, so I'm gonna try and put that in ours as well. Probably not as big as yours. Anyway, and that's what she said. Go ahead, John. What's up?
First, happy anniversary.
Thanks.
And I just learned that a buddy of mine has like dozens of followers on Instagram. He's kind of a big deal. I don't know, maybe you've heard of him, JLA Fanatic,
No.
Jalafana Fanatic, something like that. I can't really. I'm not good at word things, but yeah, like dozens and dozens. Well, okay, dozens of followers. So pretty cool. And that made me think of probably one of my best times I ever had when I was in the Air Force. They used to do back when the Air Force had a bunch of money. He used to have command level tournaments and stuff for sports, and so went with the base team down to different places. And Destin, we had Eglin hold it one year, and we went down there for a week long TDY to play volleyball because again, that's back when the Air Force had money, and we go TDY to play sports for a week.
Yep.
But oh man, that was good times. In regards to this weekend, I did some binge watching with my wife of season 3 of Welcome to Wrexham,
Okay.
which is cool. I don't know if you guys have watched any of it yet, but
Not yet.
pretty
It's on the list.
pretty cool stuff. It's one of those that you can't put it off for too long because it's happening real time, right? Following the Wrexham football club, and things are really happening. So you kind of ruin it for yourself if you catch any news. But love it because Rob McElhenney and what's his name? What's the other guy's name? Deadpool guy.
Ryan Reynolds. You're
Ryan
killing me.
Reynolds. The well, our man crush. Yeah, he's in it, and they're both awesome. So it's a good show.
Yeah. I mean, I don't catch any soccer news, so I wouldn't get spoiled by real life events, but it does look like
Pretty cool.
it should be something I watch. Have you watched the next season of The Boys yet? Because I saw that's out.
I have not watched it. My wife sent me a message and said, "Hey, yeah, I heard it wasn't very good." And I was like, "Yeah, the people who have been saying it's not good are the like everything's woke people." So that probably just means, you know, they had someone who wasn't white in it or something. So
Gotcha. All right. Well, fair enough. I'm looking forward to it. We'll watch it at some point soon. Obviously, that's a later night movie or TV show when the kids are in bed or kid. Anyway. And it's summer, so we can't watch it before work. Because again, kid watching. Yeah. All right. Well, it was good catching up with everybody. I do want to get right into the topic, but before I do that, just letting all the viewers know we're gonna change the format again. So I've noticed over the last few episodes that when we talk about technical topics, there's lots of terms that we end up glossing over because everybody on the podcast knows what we're talking about, or at least nods their head like they know what we're talking about and like do the old consulting nod, like, yep, I got it, and then look it up after. And I'd like to go into a little more detail on some of those topics. So what we're going to end up doing is each episode will be dedicated to a single topic instead of trying to split focus between technical and professional development. And what we'll just do is alternate each week. So one week will be technical, the other one will be professional development. I think it'll be good for the viewers as well, because you can actually look at it and go, well, I want to listen to that topic, or maybe that topic doesn't apply to me and I'll skip this week, which is completely fine and understandable. So yeah, not covering two topics anymore. And on that note, let's go back to that controversial statement that we opened the podcast with. Testing and production, it's essential. Yay or nay? We'll start simple. See if we can even get an agreement on, is it essential? I'm gonna say yes, and I will explain my reasoning later.
by yes,
by testing in production, you mean you're talking security testing specifically?
I mean, we need to put all kinds of parameters around here, and I think that's what we're going to end up doing for the next 30 or so minutes. So sure, we'll start with security testing.
I'd say it should be done. It shouldn't be your norm. It shouldn't, it shouldn't be done unsuspected either, I don't think. But yeah, I think it's something that should be done.
All right, so you're camp test and prod. Okay. Like firmly test and prod. We're gonna go definitively. John tests and prod, and that's all the testing he does.
That's it. Yes, I have a T-shirt. Hold on. I'll be back. I'm still on. I'm still here.
John is currently changing. Tim, test and prod.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
With caveats. But
With caveats. What?
yes. Of course.
Okay. All right, Aaron, test and prod.
I'd say yes as well.
All right. Well, this
Has
is
to be
short road
someone
podcast. Someone isn't wearing pants for the podcast. It's entirely possible. You can only see us from about the waist up. I mean, none of us could be wearing pants.
I'll never tell.
You just did to the internet. It's great. All right. So we're all testing and prod. Thanks for the podcast. We're good to go. We've all said test and prod and only in prod. And that's where we're going to stop.
I don't think that's quite what I said.
No?
Nope.
All right. So we should probably clarify a ton of things. First off, this came from when I was, scrolling through LinkedIn, and somebody had made the statement that you should never test in prod, and went on and on about like why you shouldn't test in prod. Hey, all right, let's see the shirt, and I'll keep going. So the fine print is hard to read. All I can read is I do it in production. Which enough said.
Now it went to square. I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production.
So you saw my my Instagram advert for this week, or Facebook. It was on both.
Is that what it said?
It did.
And I went and bought the T-shirt. Yep.
Oh, fantastic. Awesome. Where was I? Lost it. It's fine. We'll come back. So we should probably start putting some definitions around this. So when I say test in prod, John had said, okay, security testing. Are we talking network testing, application testing, mobile application testing, hardware testing?
All of the above.
All of the above? So you made that statement for all of that. Network testing, application testing. Okay.
Certainly.
QA testing.
No.
John
QA
said
testing,
security.
QA testing would happen prior to production, ideally.
I would argue all of those things would happen prior to production.
Yes, certainly. I'm not saying exclusively test those things in production.
Just because you qualified that one, I'm like, well, hold on.
But there are certain times where some of these tests are only valid in production.
Like hardening type stuff, like
Right.
setting kind of. Yeah, absolutely.
I need to test the security of my production network. I don't want something that's allegedly the same configuration. I need that. When doing application testing to see what's actually in the wild, you can only confidently say that this, vulnerability doesn't exist in production by testing it in production.
Okay. All right. So you're doing the application testing in prod. We're doing network testing in prod. Probably config reviews and such in prod, because that makes sense. All right. That's all well and good. I did hear John say something about testing before prod. Right. So it sounds like there's a process that we would need to follow. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think we would all agree that almost all of this should happen way more often, way more thoroughly, way more automatically beforehand.
Certainly.
I am a fan, even though I've never been a part of a world where it was done well, of even QA type smoke tests in prod. I've seen where it's done kind of, sanity testing manually, but I've never been in a world where we had good smoke test of the application in prod. And I always thought that was just, I couldn't fathom why it wouldn't be good. Just take it through, not load, not stress, anything like that. Just a basic, yep, it all works, like happy path kind of stuff. But
Some functional testing, just a
Yeah.
little bit.
um,
Clicky buttons.
yeah, that's it. But that stuff, especially that kind of stuff, is usually done at the kind of UI level, right? To get the whole stack, because you can't run everything. But it's always so hard to get that stuff not insanely brittle. So it's hard to rely on it long term, I think. But anyway, kind of a tangent.
No, it's all good. Like, I think that's things we should get into. This is why I picked the topic, was because as I was looking through all the comments in that thread I referenced, like there was a lot of definitives, and I think it really bothered me. Like much like Tim, when somebody makes a definitive statement, you're like,
Oh.
wait, hold up
Yeah.
now,
I
right?
just went off on that today at work. Someone said something, and always I was like, that's like not to be like a snowflake, but that's a freaking trigger word. Whenever anybody says you always blah blah blah, I'm like, well, hold on, that's so insanely rare
Mhm.
that it's immediate smell to me when I hear an always thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I saw statements like, obviously the OP for that thread was saying you should never test in prod and you should always be testing in some lower environment. And I understood where they were coming from because they were saying, about risks of knocking over applications and things like that and doing damage to the data in the back end. And, we all came from, the Seiko days, or at least a couple of us, Aaron notwithstanding, right? Where, we would tell folks when we showed up and did those tests, this stuff could break your shit, right?
Yeah.
Like that was one of the first things we said is like, when we're installing these, we don't really want to run it against production because it could break your shit. It's potentially damaging. Do you have backups? Because it's bad. I mean, I think
we didn't. I don't know, you guys. I mean, for the most part, we didn't run it against prod.
Right.
right.
No state. I did tell the story last week, Tim. I was only setting that up because last week I told the story. I think you might have been there when they had that really bad one that the PMs kept calling us out saying it really wasn't real in prod or whatever, and we had to do a closed room thing and do it against prod, and then he told everybody to leave. And yeah, so sometimes you've got to do it against prod because people will call bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have a couple points to say on that though.
Let's get it.
One, I think it certainly depends on scoping what you're testing and what you're not testing, and making people aware of what you are and aren't testing. I think there's a certain level of non-destructive or less intrusive testing you would want to do, particularly for like internal, like testing my internal infrastructure that might not be as hardened and could potentially bring things down. When I was in my consultant days, we had testing. We had all of our ranges cleared ahead of time. That we were doing network testing, internal network testing, and we brought down production floors that were manufacturing goods because of the testing, because their network wasn't hardened for it, from an internal perspective. But anyone with a public application, especially if you have a well-known name, you should assume that there are bad actors constantly barraging and effectively testing your external facing application and infrastructure. If you're worried about doing your own testing against your external application and infrastructure, that might mean that you have some things to take care of. That should already be assumed that that's happening, and that you have to be hardened enough to even withstand your own testing. Not saying that you should be deliberately trying to knock everything down, but even doing like some DDoS testing in a controlled, well-timed period against your production environment is the only way you're going to discover the kinds of things that might be a surprise at a bad time.
So Tim, you had mentioned, only because you said, a lot of times we gloss over terminology. You had mentioned like, all the ranges were clear, and that's a good crossover term, I think, too, because that's insanely important, right? Because we have, the app I happen to work on is an always live. People are always on it, doing their thing. So anything goes sideways in any monitor, and there are people being paged. There's people being blocked. There is all hell breaks loose. So doing that without clearing the ranges is just irresponsible, like
Oh,
in
yes.
every way imaginable. There's so many. If you're doing things right, there's so many things that could be triggered by doing the kind of thing that that kind of testing can do. So I don't know.
So what do you mean by clearing ranges?
Yeah, that's the point. Sorry.
Yeah. So the fact that you've worked with stakeholders within the company, like your network services, your security operations team, that these are valid ranges that are safe for us to test against, that are in scope, that isn't going to, basically so that we don't knock something down that's vital and that's required. You might have specific ranges that are, this is set for testing because this environment isn't, taking any live traffic right now, for example, or for any other, policies or procedures you have for doing testing against potentially destructive testing against the infrastructure. You need to clear it with the appropriate people so that it can be monitored and looked after, and they can be ready to bring things back up if needed.
So you're
And I think it's important to be a part of a team. So you're not a bad guy coming in and just being an asshole who brought stuff down. You're working with them, right? They're know you're doing it, and they're watching monitors. It should be a team effort. I think it gets such a bad rap when people come in as like I'm gonna wreck your shit, ha ha ha. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tim, you were talking IP ranges. This is what that sounded like to me.
Yes.
If it's a application, I assume like URLs and other ranges like that would also need to be included so that basically the scope of the test is well defined.
Right. Everything that is okay to test, and anything that's explicitly not okay to test.
And does that include payloads as well?
Certainly, the types of testing
types.
that's going to happen. What time testing should occur or not occur. Yeah.
Right. Who you should notify, right?
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
testing has started and testing has ended. I mean, basically what we're saying is making sure that whatever test is going on in prod or any environment is well scoped, right? You know exactly what you're supposed to be testing, what you're sending. Now that doesn't, because we use tools, right? That doesn't mean you've got to literally send every payload, right? That's going to be sent. But at least the types of payloads that are going along, right?
Mhm.
Now, Tim, you're more industry. Like, what are you expecting when folks send that to you? Like, what kinds of information are you expecting when they say, "Hey, we're going to test this environment"? Or what kind of notifications are you giving out?
Well, essentially uh, the date range and time frames that the testing is going to be occurring, what the targets are for those tests. We arrange ahead of time with basically engineering representatives for the teams that are involved. That if this application is being tested, the engineers associated with that are all in a Slack channel for communicating with the testers when testing's going on. Management's all in the loop, working with our product team to make sure we're not going to impact any releases. Um,
Or,
yeah,
yeah. I mean,
essentially,
just
it's a very wide net. Ultimately, all of engineering and product is notified of the testing prior to it starting in one form or another.
In other words, it's a team effort. You're
yeah.
Absolutely,
you're part of the same team.
absolutely.
Yep. All right. So one of the things that came to my mind when they said, well, when I saw the large number of responses said, well, you should always be testing in prod. There are like some instances I could think of where it's probably not a great idea. One of the things I know that is frequently asked for by outside assessors is credentials, right? Not just regular user credentials, but multiple level credentials, so that you can test all parts of the application.
Mhm.
Probably don't want to do that kind of test in prod. At least that's my thinking, because I don't want to give a third party or lower level user admin rights on a production system,
Right.
particularly when there's sensitive information in that system.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, what we did in those cases at
I'd say where.
at least one of the places that I've worked is we had a dedicated production instance of the application, right? So it's a SaaS product, right? But there's specific instances for each customer, right? They all have their own customers for segregation of data, etc. Um, so we had in the production environment that was part of all the regular production releases, we had our own dedicated instance of the application that was all dummy data.
Okay.
So the data on it was fake, but the environment was configured exactly like production. It had the exact production code base. It was part of the normal release cycle, and that's where we had people test. Because if they did break down the instance, it had no effect on any actual production work. And if they did get into the or with the admin access that they had, they weren't seeing anything that was real data.
Yay, infrastructure as code.
Yay, infrastructure as code indeed. Yeah. Well, that's handy. Like, and I think that really works, and you can say definitively, like, this environment is the same if you're doing what John just said in his infrastructure as code.
There's a term.
Yep.
There's a term that some people might not know, right? If you want to go dive into that, right?
We could take a tangent. If you wanted to take
Well,
it, you brought it.
no, I bring this up because it was one of the things you mentioned at the beginning.
It is.
At times we'll throw out terms, just kind of assume people know, and I don't want to take. Not that I feel bad because coffee's looking bored over there, but it'd be funny. Funny, maybe not the right word. It's because some of these, I think, these words are describe themselves pretty well, and some of them don't. So I'd be curious your thoughts. Infrastructure as code is what that would be. Coffee, if you don't mind being a guinea pig.
No, and honestly, that's kind of a good point for me being here because I don't have the heavy tech background that everyone else does. But as far as infrastructure being code, everything's built on a series of coding, and while we're through the testing cycles, you're not only testing product itself, but the code and everything that it's built on. Everything goes back to, I mean, if we want to go back to Schoolhouse Rock, everything's built on BASIC and how everything evolves from there. Windows was built off of DOS, and you still see bits and pieces of C through it. So everything breaks down to the code in which that environment was built on. And what we're talking about is the production side, where it's actually out, has a slightly different environment and code that it can be running off of compared to other things.
Well, true. In this case, it's more of a like historically. If you go back, hell, a decade. Like if you go back a decade, I bet most things were in infrastructure as code, right? Like I don't think it's been that.
I don't know.
Yeah. So it used to be historically what, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the IT guys, the network guys, whatever. They would set up an environment by going to a GUI or command line and running a bunch of stuff. They might even scripted some stuff because Bob's got some script that does something over here and sets up network, and it was a bunch of manual stuff. Where the code for a long time has been like part of a pipeline, and you write it and you builds and it deploys, but the infrastructure wasn't set up that way. So infrastructure as code is taking that same paradigm developers have used for a long time and saying, well, hold on, using Helm and other things, you can codify what the entire environment is. So you can take the entire environment and run it. And so there's no more manual processes to set it all up, which lets stuff like Tim saying, like someone said something to the effect, if you can't know something, if something's real or whatever in prod, and unless you do it against prod, which for a lot of things nowadays, it's just not true because you can infrastructure as code, the latest build, all that stuff can go up. There's still some things that are different, but it's basically taking the infrastructure and having it be treated the same way developers do for the rest of our code. So it's a really awesome shift. It allows so much. But anyway,
You say it's an awesome shift. I did the quick type into my favorite search bar, just to see when, and multiple articles are crediting configuration management as like the original infrastructure as code, back to 1976.
Really? Maybe I was just a part of some crappy places.
Again, they're including configuration management and CM tools.
Well, that's okay. That's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing. Like when we say infrastructure as code, I think most people are thinking like Chef and Ansible and Terraform and things. Yeah. Like actually deploying the stuff, not configuration management.
Well, not deploying. Yeah. The fact that you've codified it, you've got in-source control, which is obviously really old. The definition for your infrastructure,
Right.
whether, like you said, there's lots of tools for doing it, but in just the places I've worked, and I haven't seemed like it's been that common for more than like a decade. I don't know. I don't know if you guys had different experiences.
One of the neat things that allows for is, like, again, at one of these other places that I worked, we had, like, let's say you needed to test a particular thing even before production, that's attached to a particular PR. Well, you could just go in and spin up a whole new environment, sandbox with that particular PR. Boom, test that particular thing. You need to see something, X version of, 3 releases ago. Spin it up. And just being able to very quickly create a whole environment with dummy data at whatever configuration and version of the application you need, do whatever testing you need to do, and, release those resources back to the pool. It's freaking awesome.
Super neat.
So this is fun because, like, going back to the original topic, we're actually drifting away from testing in prod. I think we're testing in prod, but we're not really testing in prod anymore.
Well, as I said, it's not an only in prod. It's never an only in prod.
And we did all agree on that, right? The majority of your testing should not be in prod.
Right.
Right.
But, from my perspective, validation testing, if I'm going to say this vulnerability is fixed, I'm not going to confidently say that until that's tested in prod, or if it's a code thing that I've seen the code and know that it has been pushed to prod.
That is true. The very first thing, whenever we find some bug, even if we can look at the code, we can look at our releases, the very first thing when it's scary is we'll go see if this really happens in prod. Even though we know everything's in place and it should be, we'll go see if this is real. You're right.
I've had situations where, hey, this is scheduled for this release. That release has gone. The assumption might be, hey, it was fixed. And then come to find out that, oh, well, it caused some issue, and so they rolled it back and never told anybody. And so it wasn't in production.
The one I was thinking of too, and this is absolutely a factor when you're dealing with production stuff, is the one I actually did that. It was no more than a month ago. I had a similar issue. It was a scary thing. And we were like, crap, go see if this is real in production. Because you often have to deal with third-party APIs, not as part of your code, but like you're making calls out to systems. And the system you're calling from prod is usually not the same system you're calling from test, right? So you might be fine. Like you might be able to match it, but you don't know what they're doing on the other side. So it might be something that's only exists in test because you're hitting a different system, and they might not be as mature as you. So you're right. You can't know unless you look in prod.
So that's an interesting take, and not something that I've heard frequently. So if I'm like walking a pretty standard process, like you do a penetration test of a web app, right? And that report's handed off to dev. Dev goes off and fixes it. When you do that revalidation, you're revalidating off in prod?
Yes.
Cool.
I mean, we'll test it before prod to make sure that it's actually fixing it.
Yeah, fair enough.
The issue is not closed until it's been confirmed in prod.
Cool. Like that's neat, and it's not something that I've heard before. And we've got new hosts that have joined us. Welcome, Megan and Nagel. Nagel, Old Bald and Grumpy that's also in chat, is a previous coworker of yours. Anyway, welcome you two. Today we're talking about testing in prod. Just to give you two a little bit of background, this came off of a conversation I saw on LinkedIn where one person made a very bold statement that said you should never test in prod. All testing should be done in a lower environment. And all of the replies, or most of them, were like, no, you should always test in prod, and that's the only place you should test. Or one person was like, any attacker worth their salt won't break things in prod. All definitive statements that I didn't really care for. So we're talking about it today. Nagel, do you have a viewpoint on testing in prod versus lower environments?
Back in the day, I would say it was probably more expensive to test in dev, but because of the way the cloud works now, I mean, spinning up something in the cloud for a day or two or a week or whatever is just so much easier. So what makes sense depends on how much money you want to spend, right? Because all these resources cost money, and generally it's frowned upon to, I would say, at least from a security standpoint, it's frowned upon to test in prod.
I completely disagree.
But it depends on the type of environment, right? Like, are we talking about something that releases every day, or are we talking about? No, it depends. Most of the way places I've worked in the past had pipelines to get to prod, where UATs and all kinds of system testings and other type of testing would be done before they were even given the ability to get to prod.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that was probably the next part that we were headed to, was that pipeline of tests and what should probably be happening along the way. Like we've put some guardrails in place around what we think should be tested in prod and what shouldn't be tested in prod in some of those circumstances. But I mean, since you've joined, now's probably a good time to talk about that process. So what lower environments and what tests are you expecting to see before somebody is allowed to do a security test in production? I'm asking Nagel, so you can keep talking.
Places I've worked before generally are going to say, it depends on the maturity of the organization and how much rigor they put behind what it is that they're doing. I've seen testing in prod, push comes to shove, you want to get something out the door, you're gonna test in prod because that's just the way it is. Because you don't have time to set up a dev environment and have the maturity that you generally would be. Prototyping, just setting up something new to put out there in the market, that type of thing does happen all the time. Expect that to happen.
Right.
With the flexibility of the cloud, that's expected. With systems that are more rigorous, that deal with gov or sensitive data that have compliance things associated with it, you're not allowed to do that kind of stuff. Like, just by default, you're not allowed to.
Sure.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's one of the guardrails we had said earlier, was if it's sensitive information, probably want to test that in lower environments with dummy data. Or if you can, like Tim made a really good point, if you've got infrastructure as code set up and you can set up a prod environment with dummy data, that seems like the way to go, so that you can say, yep, I can definitively say infrastructure as code, this is the same as prod. However, the data is not the same. So yeah, have at it, pen tester. Here's the fun credentials. Go break things if you can.
So I would beg to differ that there is a difference between prod and not prod, right? Like, prod is, let me give you an example. There's certain times throughout the year where they have change freezes in locations because of the amount of transactions that are expected for, let's say, Black Friday or those types of places. And there's people on this call who probably also have experience with uptimes and transactional overload where you can't test in prod, because if you bring the whole thing down, that's a problem.
Yep. There's
Well,
probably...
Tim did, just to summarize, Tim said really quickly, coordination with everybody is insanely important. So getting the right time, all that good stuff. Also, it being a smell, if you're super worried about it bringing down your system in prod, is probably maybe a good indication that you do need to do something. Obviously, insanely coordinated, because you have to assume bad guys are pen testing your app for you.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going to say that what Tim suggested in terms of infrastructure as code is not prod. I mean, to a certain point, if it's infrastructure as code, then it is prod realistically. It's just not necessarily, let's say, publicly accessible the way your HTTP site would be, right?
The way we had it, it was spun up exactly like any other customer instance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was an exact customer production instance and a production environment, and it just had dummy data, but otherwise indistinguishable from any other customer instance.
Yeah,
Proper
I think
certs and everything.
We
is the
had,
same.
we had other environments that were configured differently, that were on different infrastructure, like one being on HA proxy versus versus something else. I'm not going to go into the whole infrastructure that we had.
no, you don't want to do that.
But those differences could, it conceivably, and depending on the type of testing you're doing, come back and say, oh, well, that's not how it works in this environment versus that environment. And having certain debug messages or other things that might operate differently in the QA build versus the production build. And like the one things that I was saying, the biggest point I was making with production testing before you had come on the call is that, in my opinion, especially when doing like a validation that a vulnerability has been fixed, I'm not going to close that issue until I've validated that in production that it no longer exists.
Oh, so let's clarify. There is a difference now that you pointed that out, Tim, that there's a difference between, in my mind, verifying code in production, which could be considered testing, but it's more verification than it is like, I'm going to go make some code changes and throw it into prod and see what happens kind of thing, versus, there's some system that's already, they've already developed some design that, you've identified some vulnerability, they've designed and they've fixed it, and now you're validating that in production that you don't have that vulnerability. That's absolutely something that has to happen for sure.
Right. And otherwise, even doing like web application penetration testing, I'm going to want to do that in production as well.
Yeah, within reason.
Yes.
Yeah, but even some stuff like that, though, we were talking infrastructure as code and how awesome it is, but I'd argue certain things, like certain kinds of problems you find, if you can verify the hash of the build that's going out there, where the commit exists, where a localized application kind of problem, you can verify without verifying in production that is fixed in production.
To a certain point, John,
Sure.
I'd agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, now don't get me wrong. More of a holistic problem, like if it's infrastructure-y, kind of like multiple things at play, then I absolutely agree. But if you've got like a commit that fixes a thing found with static code analysis, and here's your exact problem, and that hash of the commit, and then there's a pretty reasonable, like, hey, not to speak to the whole never definitives, because you were going down the I only do it in prod. But some ones, yeah, you can reasonably say, no, that's fixed.
Like a discrete problem is what you're talking about. Like
yeah. If it's small, it's isolated. It's just kind of one. I found it through static code analysis for something, or where we confirmed it. Like, here's the problem.
Here's my problem, John. Is that this to me sounds very similar to, I'm approaching an intersection and I'm in the left turn lane. If there are situations where I should or shouldn't be using my turn signal here, John.
I literally had that conversation with my daughter.
Feel like
the driver's ed today.
You should just always turn it on, because you don't want to have to be thinking about when I should or shouldn't use it. You're making the turn, you put it on.
I agree with the sentiment that it should be the standard, like, like the standard policy. But if like you're getting, for example, let's say an issue was reported, right, and it went all the way up your chain, and like some super high C-level person was like, "Oh, that's a horrible thing." You telling that person, "Hey, you know what? I've seen the fix in code. I've heard," and like assuaging their concerns. I'd say you could probably do earlier on an isolated kind of a thing versus saying, "No, but we're not going to sign off fully until it's here." I'm just saying there
Certainly.
are different levels because you are one team. And I think that's where most security people sometimes get a bad rap, is when they try to make it an adversary kind of thing, and they're like,
Yeah.
"We're going to show
Yeah.
you." You should be working with them, and if you can show with reasonableness, "Hey, it's this fix," you can report that up chain. "This looks real. We're going to confirm it in production, but it looks like this has been fixed." Blah 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 blah. I think.
Certainly, but those are your those are your rare items, right? Most of your vulnerabilities are not in that category that you're going to be reporting up to the C-suite about, "Oh my gosh, this is a horrible thing." Maybe in your world, every vulnerability falls into that. But if everything's an emergency, nothing's an emergency.
True.
So
I wasn't saying everything. I was not
when it's
speaking
just
of.
looking at, hey, here's the vulnerabilities from our annual pen test, or hey, here's some vulnerabilities that were reported through bug bounty, or hey, here's some things that we found XYZ, and you have a process set up, especially for the junior members on your team, of this is the process we follow to validate a vulnerability that it has been resolved. I absolutely say that anything that I have my fingers on is going to have that final step be tested in production.
Absolutely, 100%.
All right.
And
Yeah,
even
I
from an
agree.
auditor standpoint, right? Like auditors for any type of situation are going to say, we need to see this in production. Now, the difference that I would say is sometimes testing in lower places is required just based on virtual networking and VPNs, and you want to control who has access to these things before it gets into prod. But you're right, validation in prod is required.
All right. So I think we've settled it. Testing in prod with all kinds
Only
of
thing,
caveats and
yeah,
guardrails.
the only thing you should ever do.
No, I disagree
Testing
with
in
that.
prod.
No, I mean with all kinds of caveats and guardrails in place, right? And so I think it fits with what a lot of us have said. Like the later tests are the verification and validation that the rest of your process has worked, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think we were getting at when Nagel joined, was that there's tests or design review that's supposed to happen early in the process, and then as you're deploying the app, and you can't see my hand, as you're deploying the app, right, there's supposed to be tests in lower level environments that are maybe more destructive, and as you make your way up to prod, that's that last verification that goes, yep, nope, there is in fact no issues here. We've already tested all of these other environments that may or may not be available depending on budget and other constraints, and we can definitively say, yeah, we're good to go with what we're able to test. Now, I forget who made the point, but there are always bad guys testing, and they have more time to test than you do, all the time. So we're definitively saying test in prod, and only in prod, right?
Only in prod.
Only in prod.
Yep.
Fantastic. Well, that means we've started, or we're ending where we started.
Well, hold on. Let's clarify, because it would suck if we didn't, because sarcasm isn't always clear. Someone could have
fair
popped in
enough.
here and not really know. Yes, the pyramid of testing, where unit test is way down here, the big fat food pyramid guy, up through kind of service integration, blah blah blah, and your quantity. I'd say that kind of applies from a sideways going to prod, maybe as well. I've never really thought about it from that analogy
But
perspective,
yeah,
but
I could see that. Yeah.
yeah.
That works for me. I'm picturing
Like,
it.
I guess I'd be left to right, right? Like oh my gosh, I'm in the dev test environment, insane amount of testing,
Right.
little less, and in prod, you're verifying and you're
Right.
testing.
So if you're a developer or tester that's listening, just take the pyramids in Egypt and turn them sideways, and that's how we're saying that your testing should be. Your security testing. I'll buy it. That's fine. And I think that's a good place to end, unless there's any final points. Anything we might have missed. Going once, going twice. Everybody wants the game. Fantastic. Well, then that's it for the In-Secure-Ity Podcast. If you're still watching or listening, make sure you click the follow or the like button, or even leave a comment. Let us know what you think or what you'd like to see changed. I'm Drew Thompson with all my good friends here, talking about hopefully making your apps more secure. And next week we'll have something more on professional development. Just
You
remember,
called me a friend.
I did. Yeah. So stay secure, stay connected, and we'll catch you on the next episode.